You never forget the moment a dog stares into the forest and refuses to move, because sometimes that's how truth begins. In the quiet woods of Cedar Ridge, something dark was hiding among the trees. But one old dog, with tired legs and eyes that missed nothing, was about to change everything. If you believe in loyalty that never fades, in courage that comes on four legs subscribe and stay with us. This story will stay in your heart long after it ends. The morning mist clung to the pines of North Carolina like a thin silver veil as the first light of day broke over the quiet hills surrounding the Cedar Ridge summer camp. It was early June, and the air held the sharp sweetness of pine sap and the earthy promise of warm days to come. Near the edge of the campground, a gravel road wound its way past cabins painted in cheerful colors, green, yellow, and sky blue, each surrounded by the soft rustle of pine needles beneath hiking boots and sneakers. Claire Morgan stood by the open trunk of her dusty old Subaru Outback, her gray hair pulled into a neat bun beneath a faded khaki cap. She was in her early 50s, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in practical cargo pants and a forest green polo shirt marked with the Red Cross symbol of her role, camp nurse. Life had carved both strength and gentleness into Claire's face, soft lines around her eyes from years of squinting into sunlight and deeper ones near her mouth from holding grief in silence. She had been a hospital nurse for over 2 decades before losing her husband to a car accident 6 years ago. The quiet life of a seasonal camp nurse had suited her, since structured but gentle, far from the intensity of the ER. Her eyes, often unreadable to most, brightened only around one creature. "Come on, Duke," she called softly, slamming the trunk shut. Duke leapt down from the back seat with a slow grace, his movements a touch stiff from age but still powerful. He was a German shepherd, 12 years old, with a black saddle and tan limbs, his muzzle now dusted with gray. Duke had once served in the K-9 unit bomb detection, search and rescue, crowd control, but retired after a spinal injury nearly ended his mobility. Claire had adopted him not long after, and in the years since, they'd become inseparable. His ears still perked at the slightest sound. His eyes still scanned the surroundings, like he was reading a language only he could see. There was something regal about him, his gait slow but deliberate, the way he sat like a sentry by the infirmary door, or nudged Claire's hand when she forgot to rest. The camp was already buzzing. Kids dragged their duffels into the check-in lines, while teenage counselors with lanyards corralled them like half-distracted sheepdogs. The scent of fresh pancakes and sunscreen filled the air, mingled with the squeals of reunion and nervous laughter. Somewhere near the main cabin, a megaphone crackled as the camp director gave instructions no one was really listening to. Claire and Duke walked toward the medical cabin, tucked beneath a tall pine at the south edge of the clearing. As they passed a group of boys tossing a frisbee, Duke's ears flicked and his head turned, nostrils flaring slightly. He gave a soft grunt, not quite a growl, more a thoughtful rumble, and paused to sniff the air toward the back of the maintenance shed. Claire followed his gaze. It was a small structure, weather-worn with a rusted lock and peeling paint, usually filled with tools and boxes of forgotten equipment. The door hung slightly ajar. Claire made a mental note to ask someone to check it later. Then she saw him, Carter Hill, sitting alone at the base of a tree with a sketchbook on his knees. He was one of the younger campers, maybe 11, with a mop of curly brown hair that always looked like it had just been tousled by the wind. He wore oversized glasses that slid down his nose every few minutes and closed slightly too big, as if passed down from someone older. Carter didn't laugh like the other kids. He barely spoke at all. Most campers arrived in groups, already familiar through school or siblings. Carter arrived alone, clutching his backpack like it might vanish if he let go. Word was, his father worked offshore, and his mother had recently moved to another town. He'd been signed up by an aunt, who hoped the summer would make him less weird. But Carter wasn't weird. He was observant, watching people in shadows like they were part of the same page. Right now, he was sketching Duke. The boy's hand moved in quick, precise strokes, and the way his eyes followed Duke's every step said he wasn't just drawing, he was capturing something real. Claire smiled and led Duke over. "You've got a fan," she said softly. Carter looked up. His eyes didn't hold surprise, just recognition. "He's beautiful," he whispered. Claire crouched beside him. "That's Duke. He used to be a police dog." Carter nodded like he already knew. He doesn't trust the building behind the tool shed. Claire blinked. What makes you say that? He looked at it 3 times when you walked by. His nose twitched. Dogs do that when something's wrong. His tone was matter of fact, as if he were explaining math. Claire turned to the shed again. You're pretty sharp. People say I'm too quiet, but I see stuff. She studied him a moment longer. There was an old soul in that boy. She patted his shoulder gently and stood. Keep drawing. If you need anything, you come find me, or Duke. Carter nodded solemnly, as if accepting a mission. By afternoon, the activities had begun. Kids were assigned cabins, counselors introduced themselves with silly rhymes, and Claire did the standard health checks bug spray reminders, allergy notes, sprained ankles. Through it all, Duke lay quietly by the door, his gaze never wandering far from the tree line. Every now and then, he'd glance toward the shed again, something in his body tightening with suspicion. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the campgrounds, Duke stood abruptly from where he'd been resting. His ears perked, nose in the air, body alert. Claire turned just in time to see a figure in the distance, someone in a brightly colored outfit, almost like a mascot or clown costume, moving between the trees. The figure vanished before she could make out more than a blur of red and blue. Odd choice of wardrobe, Claire muttered. Duke let out a low rumble, body rigid. Tomorrow, Claire whispered, reaching down to rub behind his ear. We'll look into it tomorrow. And as night fell over Cedar Ridge, the laughter of children echoed under the tall pines, but Duke remained watchful. Something had already begun shifting in the wind. The following evening, the Cedar Ridge summer camp transformed into a swirl of orange firelight, sticky marshmallows, and laughter echoing beneath the tall pines. The annual opening night bonfire was a tradition held by the Lake a Glowing Heart to mark the beginning of the summer season. Long logs circled the fire pit, and kids cradled skewers with melting s'mores, while counselors led silly songs with guitars and half-sincere enthusiasm. Claire Morgan stood off to the side, arms crossed lightly over her chest, her gaze split between the dancing flames and the children's faces. The warmth of the fire on her cheeks was comforting, but Duke's stiff body beside her was not. The German shepherd sat upright, ears tilted forward, his tail still against the dirt. His eyes weren't on the fire or the kids. They were fixed beyond the circle, past the shimmering line of pine trunks into the dark where torchlight didn't reach. Claire followed his gaze. Nothing, just forest and the hum of cicadas. You okay, boy? She asked under her breath, reaching down to touch the top of his head. His fur bristled slightly beneath her fingers. Just then, a loud voice boomed from the far side of the gathering. Hey, hey, hey! Who's ready for some fun? Heads turned. A tall figure bounded into the clearing, dressed head to toe in a colorful clown, costume red suspenders, polka dot shirt, oversized yellow shoes, and a plush, comically large head with painted blue eyes and a frozen grin. The name tag pinned to the chest read, Buddy the Camp Clown. Children clapped, some screamed in delight, while others instinctively leaned closer to their counselors. The clown carried a bright green sack and began tossing out tiny goodie bags, pencil toppers, candy bracelets, noisemakers. Duke let out a low growl that vibrated through the ground. Claire's brow furrowed. Easy, Duke. But he didn't ease. His front paw stepped forward, his body tense, eyes locked on the clown like he was watching a threat. Claire tugged lightly on the leash. Duke didn't budge. Meanwhile, the clown made his way around the fire pit, laughing in high-pitched bursts and stopping to tousle the hair of giggling kids. But something was wrong. Claire couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way the man moved, not with the clumsy exaggeration of a playful performer, but with too much purpose, too much precision. His steps were calculated, his gestures rehearsed, but hollow. As the clown neared the left side of the circle, Duke's growl deepened, turning heads. Ma'am, said a young voice beside her. Claire turned to see a lanky boy of about 16, with freckled cheeks and curly red hair poking out from under a camp counselor cap. His name tag read, Tyler. Tyler looked uneasy. Is your dog okay? He's kind of freaking out. Claire nodded slowly. He's trained to alert. He doesn't usually overreact. Her eyes didn't leave the clown. Just then Carter appeared, stepping out from between 2 campers. He clutched his sketchbook tightly, his oversized t-shirt marked with charcoal smudges. He stood only a few feet from the clown, as the figure bent to hand a bag to a small girl with braids. Carter didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just stared. The clown turned slightly toward him, just enough for Carter to glimpse the painted blue eyes and the stiff neck. In that instant, something flickered in Carter's expression. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Without saying a word, Carter backed away slowly, then turned and disappeared into the shadows near the arts and crafts tent. Claire noticed the movement and made a note to check on him. Later that night, when the flames were embers and the children tucked into their sleeping bags, Claire walked back to the infirmary cabin with Duke trotting silently beside her. The sky above shimmered with stars, and the air was thick with the scent of pine sap and campfire smoke. When she opened the door, Carter was already sitting on the wooden steps, knees drawn to his chest, sketchbook balanced on one thigh. "I didn't mean to scare anyone," he said without looking up. "You didn't," Claire replied, kneeling beside him. "You okay?" Carter nodded. "I drew him." He flipped the sketchbook around. Claire blinked. The drawing was striking, not childish, but deliberate. The clown's figure loomed tall and narrow on the page, but what caught Claire's attention were the eyes. In the sketch, the blue orbs were not playful. They were cold, empty like glass buttons on a taxidermy mount. "I saw him last night," Carter said softly. "He wasn't wearing the costume, but I recognized the way he stood. He was by the girl's cabin after lights out." Claire's skin prickled. "Did you tell anyone?" Carter shook his head. "No one listens to kids like me, but Duke saw it too, didn't he?" Claire looked down. Duke was sitting beside them, ears forward again, nose twitching toward the direction of the lake. She placed a hand on Carter's shoulder. "Thank you for telling me." That night, after Carter went to bed, Claire sat at the table inside her cabin, staring at the sketch. Something about the clown, his movements, Duke's reaction, Carter's certainty. It all pointed to something off. But what? A hired entertainer gone rogue? Someone slipping into costume for a darker reason? She searched the staff roster. There was no Buddy the Camp Clown listed. The next morning, when she asked the camp director, a petite woman named Marjorie Tate, about the clown's booking, the answer surprised her. "Oh, that was a last-minute hire," Marjorie chirped, her short bobbed hair bouncing with each word. "One of the parents volunteered someone, said he was great with kids and had done other events." "Do you have his name?" Claire asked. Marjorie blinked, then frowned slightly. I thought I did. It should be in the volunteer file. Want me to check?" "Yes, please," Claire said, her tone gentle but firm. Duke, lying at her feet, let out another low growl. By the third day at Cedar Ridge, the summer rhythm had settled in. The mornings buzzed with canoe races and scavenger hunts, while the afternoons melted into naps and art projects under the shade of long-armed pines. The heat had thickened, draping the camp in a humid stillness that made even the birds seem quieter. But beneath the surface of routine, something had begun to shift, something subtle but unmistakable. Claire Morgan stood at the edge of the dining pavilion, pouring lemonade from a plastic jug into a cooler. She glanced at the sun climbing high above the treetops and wiped a bead of sweat from her brow. Duke lay nearby, sprawled in the shade, his ears alert even in rest. The German shepherd hadn't relaxed in days. Each time someone walked past the maintenance shed, his nose flared. Each time a child cried or shouted, he looked up, and more than once he had growled softly at shadows that Claire couldn't see. Lunch had just ended, and campers were drifting off to their cabins for quiet time. Claire took this moment to check her clipboard, noting that all allergy meds had been distributed and no new injuries had been reported. It should have been a peaceful afternoon, but peace was shattered not long after. It began with a scream sharp, high-pitched, and unmistakably terrified. It came from the trail behind the craft cabin. Claire dropped the clipboard and ran, Duke instantly at her side. When she rounded the bend, she found two girls in swimsuits near the trailhead, their eyes wide, faces pale. "She's gone!" one of them cried. "Lena's gone!" Lena, a sweet 7-year-old with freckles and a chipped front tooth, always dragging around a stuffed pink bear named Mr. Pickles. She'd been placed in the youngest cabin, shared with 5 other girls and a soft-spoken counselor named Dana. Claire knelt quickly. "What happened?" "We were playing mermaids after lunch. Lena said she was going to get her towel. She never came back." "Did you see anyone else near the cabin?" Both girls shook their heads. Camp protocol was immediate. Within 10 minutes, the director, Marjorie Tate, had called an emergency assembly. Campers were gathered at the amphitheater, and all counselors were ordered to sweep the grounds in pairs. Claire, however, trusted something deeper, something with a better nose than any human. "Find her, Duke," she whispered. Duke stood rigid for a moment, then lowered his head and began to sniff along the dirt path behind the cabin. Claire followed as he moved with more urgency than she'd seen all week. They passed the canoe docks, the stables, and looped back around the far edge of the camp, where the old maintenance shed cast a crooked shadow in the sunlight. Duke stopped cold. He sniffed along the base of the structure, then scratched at the ground near a pile of stacked crates. Claire knelt, brushing the dirt away. There, half tucked beneath a crate, was a pink corner of fabric. She pulled it out gently. It was Lena's handkerchief embroidered with little daisies and the letter L. Claire's pulse quickened. She scanned the area, then tried the shed door. Locked. The windows were too high to peer through. Just then, a voice behind her said, "Everything okay?" Claire turned to see Jake Branson, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with sunburned cheeks and a calm, easygoing smile. Jake had been hired as groundskeeper for the summer. With his worn ball cap and dusty jeans, he looked more like a rancher than a camp worker, and his thick southern drawl made him popular with the kids during nature hikes. "Jake," Claire said, trying to steady her voice, "you have the keys to the shed?" "Sure do," he replied, pulling a ring of keys from his belt loop. "Why?" "Because we need to check inside. Now." Jake opened the lock without question. The door creaked open, revealing a cluttered interior of rakes, broken furniture, and old decorations. It smelled like mildew and motor oil. Duke stepped inside first, nose low, tail stiff. He sniffed toward the back wall, but didn't growl, just circled, then returned to the doorway, his body still tense. Claire searched quickly but found nothing unusual. No child, no sign of fresh footprints or clothing. Still, the handkerchief had been there. They stepped outside again, and Duke led them around the back of the shed, stopping at a bush with broken branches. There were partial tracks in the dirt small, like a child's. Then they vanished into pine needles. Claire stood in silence, the unease spreading deeper. Someone had taken Lena, she was sure of it, and they knew how to cover their trail. While the official search continued, Claire returned to the infirmary to check the security log. There were no cameras around the shed, but one faced the rear path near the counselor cabins. She opened the files. Most were uneventful. But then, at 1:48 p.m., just after lunch, a figure passed quickly through the edge of the frame tall, carrying something, wearing what looked like red fabric. The image was blurry. The figure moved fast and low. Claire paused the screen and zoomed in. The shape wasn't clear, but Duke, watching from the corner, let out a sudden sharp bark. She looked at him. "You saw that too, didn't you?" Elsewhere in the camp, the emotional toll was spreading. The younger girls were in tears. Counselors did their best to soothe them, but a shadow had fallen over the camp. No one wanted to say the word out loud, but they all feared it. Kidnapped. Meanwhile, Carter had become more withdrawn. Claire noticed him that evening sitting alone near the campfire circle, sketching furiously. When she approached, she saw the drawing. A dark figure crouched near a tree, a bundle in its arms. The eyes were shaded with sharp lines, angry, hollow. "I saw him again," Carter whispered without looking up. "Where?" "By the maintenance path. He was watching the kids through the trees. He saw me too." Claire knelt beside him. "You're brave for telling me." "I don't think anyone else would believe me, except Duke." Claire looked down. Duke had settled beside Carter, resting his head on the boy's foot. Carter didn't flinch. Instead, he placed a hand gently on Duke's neck. For the first time all week, Carter smiled. The woods behind the Cedar Ridge maintenance shed were older than the rest of the camp, darker, quieter, with a canopy so thick that daylight barely broke through. It was a place the kids were warned not to go, and most of them listened. But not everyone stayed on the trails, and that morning, Duke refused to be dissuaded. He circled the edge of the shed with a sense of urgency, his paws kicking up dirt, then stopped by a barely visible footpath. His nose pressed low to the earth, tail raised and body tense. Claire stood beside him, gripping the leash loosely. Her khaki shirt clung to her back in the rising heat. She glanced behind her at Jake Branson, who had just arrived with a radio clipped to his belt and a cautious look in his blue eyes. Jake, the camp's groundskeeper, had an easy charm. Tall with sun-worn skin and a strong jaw that always looked like it was halfway to a smirk. He was ex-military, though he never talked about it unless asked. Most people found him steady, capable. Claire found him useful, if a little too calm in the face of rising tension. "I've never seen Duke this wound up," Claire muttered. Jake tilted his head, scanning the narrow trail. "You think this has to do with the missing girl?" "I think he smells something that doesn't belong." They followed Duke into the trees, their boots crunching pine needles. The trail wound deeper than Claire remembered, narrowing into a tunnel of green. Every so often Duke would pause, sniff the air, then move with even greater purpose. About 15 minutes in, Jake stopped and knelt. "Prince," he said, pointing to the soft ground. Claire leaned closer, faint but clear. 2 sets of footprints, one large, one much smaller. Lena hadn't just wandered, she'd been led. Duke suddenly barked once, loud and sharp. Claire straightened, heart quickening. Ahead, barely visible through the trees, stood a structure. A cabin. Weathered, with a moss-streaked roof and boarded-up windows, it looked like it hadn't been used in years. A crooked no trespassing sign hung from one nail, swaying in the breeze. "I thought this place was off limits," Claire said. Jake nodded, jaw tightening. "It is. Old Ranger's shack from before the camp expanded. We never demolished it." Duke approached the steps cautiously, sniffing each plank, his body a coil of muscle and instinct. Claire followed, brushing cobwebs from the doorframe. The door was cracked open. Jake moved first, pushing the door with the toe of his boot. It creaked slowly inward, revealing a single-room interior scattered with broken chairs, discarded paint cans, and torn sleeping bags. The air smelled musty mold, dust, and something sour underneath. Duke stepped inside and went straight to the back corner. He sniffed, growled once, then backed away. Claire knelt beside the spot. There, tucked beneath a blanket that had clearly been used recently, was a piece of red fabric. She picked it up. It was part of a costume, synthetic and cheap. The color matched the clown suit Buddy had worn at the bonfire. Jake stood over her shoulder. "What the hell is that doing here?" Claire didn't answer right away. Her thoughts moved faster than she could speak them. "The guy in the clown suit," she said finally. "I checked with the director yesterday. There's no official record of him, no last name, no ID on file." Jake's brow furrowed. "You think someone impersonated staff?" "I think he never worked here at all." They searched the rest of the shack but found no sign of Lena. Still, the evidence was enough. Claire took photos of the fabric and the footprints before they left. Later that day, as the sun arced overhead and the campers returned to their routines, climbing wall, swimming, bracelet making, Claire found Carter sitting on the edge of the sports field, sketchbook in his lap. His legs were crossed and his pencil scratched rhythmically across the page. She sat down beside him, careful not to spook him. "Hey, Carter." He looked up briefly, then down again. "Can I see what you're drawing?" He hesitated, then flipped the page toward her. It was a portrait not of Duke, but of a man. Not clearly detailed, but certain things stood out. A sharp jaw, a baseball cap pulled low, a candy in hand, and a strange grin that didn't reach the eyes. "That's the man who gave me candy," Carter said quietly. "He came by my cabin 2 nights ago. He said he was with the camp, but he smelled weird." Claire's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" "Like plastic, and something sour, like vinegar and paint." Claire felt the memory click into place, the same sour smell from the abandoned cabin. "Did you see where he went?" Carter nodded. "He walked toward the woods, same way Duke went this morning." Claire glanced at the sketch again. The face was distorted, almost cartoonish, but the emotion was real. She placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You did good, Carter. This helps more than you know." That evening, Claire returned to the maintenance shed. She checked the door still locked, but behind it, something had shifted. The padlock was newer, clean. She hadn't noticed that before. She walked around the back. The crates had been moved. Just then, her radio crackled. It was Jake. "Claire, you might want to come down to the lakefront. Now." She ran. When she arrived, Jake pointed to a small dock where counselors had just pulled a soaked life jacket from the water. On the inside collar, written in fading permanent marker, was the name Lena W. "She didn't drown," Claire said, staring at it. "I know," Jake replied, "but someone wants us to think she did." Back at the infirmary, Claire laid out all the evidence: Lena's handkerchief, the clown fabric, Carter's drawing, the security footage, the footprints, the life jacket. One thing became clear. The man in the clown suit wasn't working alone, and Lena was still out there. That night, Duke refused to sleep. He stood at the door, eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the camp's main road. And Claire knew. They were running out of time. The forest was different at night. Not quiet, never quiet, but charged with a kind of watchful stillness. The crickets held their breath between chirps, and the wind, usually constant through the pines, now seemed to whisper in gusts too faint to trace. A thin layer of mist curled along the ground as Claire Morgan followed Duke down the narrow path behind the camp's maintenance shed. The moon, high and pale above the treetops, cast long, warping shadows. Each step away from the safety of the campgrounds felt like crossing an unseen threshold. Claire wore her old hiking boots, a dark hoodie, and a headlamp turned off for now. Beside her walked Jake Branson, flashlight in hand. His usual relaxed posture had stiffened into something more vigilant. He had traded his camp uniform for a black thermal and worn jeans. Strapped discreetly to his belt was a compact folding knife. "Ready?" Claire whispered. Jake nodded. "I'll go first. Keep Duke close." Duke, the aging German shepherd, was already crouched low, tail down, head forward. Though arthritis had dulled some of his speed, his instincts remained sharp as razors. His ears twitched at every broken twig. Since discovering the red costume scrap and the discarded life jacket, he hadn't stopped pacing. Something in him knew time was running out. The abandoned cabin emerged through the trees like a rotting tooth in a forest mouth. Its warped roof leaned under years of rain and moss, and the front porch creaked even before they stepped onto it. Jake tried the door. Locked. Claire reached into her backpack and pulled out a small pry bar. "Found this in the med supply drawer. Hope no one misses it." 2 careful shoves later, the door popped open with a groan that echoed too loud in the night. They slipped inside. Jake shut the door behind them. Claire clicked on her flashlight. Low beam. The room was colder than outside, filled with the stale tang of mold, wet wood, and something chemical like cleaning solvent and glue. Dust motes drifted in the narrow beam of light, swirling like nervous thoughts. They moved quietly, scanning broken furniture, empty crates, and a rolled-up sleeping mat in the corner. The blanket had been removed. Duke stepped ahead, nose twitching. He approached an old dresser near the back wall, its drawers warped and mostly empty. Then he stopped. Growled. Claire hurried over and knelt beside him. "What is it, boy?" Jake shone his light at the base of the dresser. One of the floorboards looked different, too clean. Claire pressed it gently, and it gave way with a soft click, a false bottom. With a slow, careful motion, she lifted the board. Inside, nestled between folded canvas and plastic sheeting, was a zippered duffel bag. Claire opened it. The air inside was worse pungent with rubber, sweat, and a sharp chemical bite that made her eyes water. She pulled out a bundle of fabric. It was the clown's suit. Buddy the camp clown. Crumpled, but unmistakable. Underneath, several small vials with yellowed labels clinked together, marked with faded black ink. Ketamine, diazepam, chloroform. One was half empty. Beneath the vials lay a laminated map. Claire unfolded it on the ground. Several locations were circled in red across the state summer camps. Outdoor centers, festival fairgrounds. Cedar Ridge was one of them. Others were marked with numbers, symbols. Next to one was the word confirmed. Another, drop late July. Jake's breath hitched. He's targeting them, one by one. Claire pulled out her phone and began taking pictures. A sound, soft, behind them. The door creaked. Duke spun, growling, his hackles raised. Claire barely turned before a shadow rushed into the room, tall, fast, masked. The flashlight hit the clown's plastic face just as he lunged. Jake reached for his knife, but the figure shoved him hard against the wall. Claire stepped back, phone in hand, when Duke launched forward with a sharp, guttural bark. The man swung a flashlight like a club, but Duke ducked low and sank his teeth into the man's calf. The scream that followed was not clownish. It was raw, human, and furious. "Get out!" Jake shouted, recovering just enough to shove the attacker into the table. Claire grabbed Duke's harness. "Let go, boy, come!" Duke hesitated only a second before obeying. They bolted out the door and into the woods. Branches tore at Claire's hoodie, the path uneven and slippery beneath her boots. She could hear crashing behind them, shouts then silence. They didn't stop until the camp's outer lights flickered through the trees. Back in her cabin, Claire locked the door and sank into a chair, breathing hard. Jake was bruised but alert, already checking the photos. "He's not just some drifter," Jake muttered. "This is organized." Claire glanced down at Duke. His mouth was bloody, chest rising and heaving pants, but his eyes still burned with focus. "We need to call the sheriff first thing in the morning," she said. But morning brought something worse. At breakfast, campers gathered slowly, murmuring. Claire scanned the tables for Carter. He wasn't there, neither was his sketchbook. She ran to the arts and crafts tent. Empty. She asked 3 counselors. No one had seen him since lights out. Claire returned to the trail behind the infirmary where Carter often drew. Lying near the tree roots was a crumpled wrapper peppermint, the same kind Carter had once said the man gave him. Duke growled again. The nightmare wasn't over. The sky was still veiled in gray when Claire stepped out of the infirmary cabin. Duke pressed at her side like a living shadow. A storm was coming, not one of rain, but the kind that shook beneath the skin. The campgrounds were hushed, campers still waking, counselors whispering about Carter's disappearance. Claire didn't join the speculation. She was already moving. In her hand was the peppermint wrapper she'd found under Carter's tree, still faintly sticky, still smelling artificial and chemical sweet. In the other, her phone, screen cracked from the night before but functioning. She'd already texted Jake and told him to stay near the main trail with 2 other staff members. If she wasn't back in 90 minutes, call the sheriff. But it was Duke who would lead this. He'd been sniffing and circling since sunrise, agitated, nose low to the dirt, tracing an invisible ribbon of scent with the dedication only a dog like him could possess. The German Shepherd was old, his body worn, but this was his work, and he'd chosen not to stop. Claire followed him beyond the cabins and stables, past the archery range, and down into the lower woods where fog gathered thick between tree roots. She moved quickly, heart pounding. Her backpack was slung tight against her back, loaded with a first aid kit, extra flashlight, and tucked in a hidden side pocket, her old service revolver, licensed and still clean. After nearly 30 minutes of hiking, Duke veered sharply off the path, down a slope slick with pine needles. He let out a single sharp bark and picked up speed. "Duke!" Claire hissed, gripping a branch to steady herself. But the dog was already at the bottom, circling a patch of earth covered in loose leaves and dry brush. He pawed once, twice, then stepped back and barked again, louder this time. Claire descended, knees aching. When she reached the spot, she saw it, a rectangular trapdoor, wooden and camouflaged with pine limbs. The metal handle was old, rusted, but recently disturbed. She took a breath and pulled. It opened with a groan. Below was darkness, a steep ladder descending into a buried shelter made of old planks and sheet metal. The air rising from it was foul damp, metallic, touched with something antiseptic and wrong. She clicked on her flashlight. Duke whined, ears back, but didn't hesitate. He descended first, his body disappearing into the gloom. Claire followed, boots hitting the creaking ladder, gun now drawn and tight in her grip. The shelter was narrow, barely 6 feet wide, with concrete flooring and walls that sweated moisture. A camping lantern sat on a crate, dimly lit. In the far corner were 2 cages crewed, made of metal bars and zip ties. Inside the first was Lena, curled into a ball, her face pale, her stuffed bear held to her chest. She stirred, eyes fluttering open. The second cage held Carter. He was awake, pressed against the bars, lips dry, sketchbook still clutched tightly in one hand. His eyes lit up when he saw Duke. "Duke found me," he whispered hoarsely. Claire ran forward. "It's okay. I'm here. You're okay now." She dropped to her knees and yanked at the lock. Just as it clicked open, a noise echoed behind her, a door creaking at the far end of the shelter. Heavy footsteps. Then the unmistakable sound of a breath drawn through a thick plastic mask. The clown was back. He emerged from the shadows wearing the tattered buddy suit, the fake smile grotesquely lit in the dim lantern glow. But now he wore no gloves. His hands were rough, veined, scarred. One of them held a long metal tool. His face beneath the plastic was barely visible, but the eyes were cold, calculating. Claire stood, gun raised. "Don't move!" He didn't stop. He lunged. Before Claire could fire, Duke launched like a bullet, slamming into the man's side. The clown fell with a grunt, the weapon clattering across the floor. Duke sank his teeth into the man's wrist, drawing a scream of rage and pain. Claire kicked the weapon further away, then grabbed a roll of duct tape from the shelf. In seconds, with Duke still growling low, she bound the man's hands behind his back and pulled the mask from his face. He was older than she expected, mid-40s. Pale, thin lips, a crooked nose that had been broken more than once. His eyes flicked between her and the children, unrepentant. "Why?" she asked. He said nothing. Claire pressed the emergency beacon on her radio. "This is Claire Morgan at Cedar Ridge. I've located the missing children. Suspect in custody. Send Forest Patrol to Sector C near the South Ridge. Emergency response needed immediately." It took 20 minutes for help to arrive. Claire spent them holding Lena, brushing her hair back, murmuring that she was safe now, while Carter sat beside Duke, one hand resting on the dog's head, whispering something only Duke could hear. The suspect was taken into custody by 2 rangers, one of whom, Officer Miles Hanley, recognized him immediately. "That's Nolan Rask," Miles said, stunned. "Federal warrant, disappeared 6 months ago, tied to abductions across 3 states. We thought he was dead." Claire didn't answer. She just pulled Carter into a gentle hug and whispered, "You're safe. We've got you." The sun had already begun its descent when the forest cleared behind them, and the familiar shape of the Cedar Ridge Infirmary came back into view. Claire Morgan walked slowly, Lena nestled in her arms, her tiny hands still clutching Mr. Pickles, her beloved stuffed bear. Behind them, Carter followed, his pace quiet but steady, his fingers never leaving Duke's thick fur. The dog, though panting, walked like a sentinel head high, body tense, gaze alert, despite the blood caked around his mouth and the stiffness in his joints. Camp was in chaos. Parents had been notified. Staff moved in a daze, stunned into silence. Sheriff's cruisers and ranger jeeps lined the dirt path like a barrier between innocence and the world that had just cracked open. Inside the infirmary, Claire wrapped Lena in a warm blanket, offered her juice, and gently handed her over to a kind, gray-haired female officer named Sergeant Joanna Kim. Sergeant Kim was compact, in her late 40s, with deep-set eyes that had seen more than their share of trauma, and a voice as soft as the wool scarf she always wore, even in summer. She knelt beside Lena and spoke in a whisper only children understood, gentle, steady, never asking too much. Meanwhile, in the back room, Carter sat on the exam table, a bandage on one elbow, a warm compress pressed against his temple. Claire sat across from him, arms resting on her knees, voice low. "Carter," she said softly, "can you tell me what happened? You're safe now? He can't hurt you?" Carter's eyes darted toward the window, then back to Duke, who sat just beside him, his large frame forming a quiet shield between the boy and the world. "He told me Duke was hurt," Carter began, his voice barely above a whisper. "He came up to me after lights out, said Duke had gotten stuck in the woods, said you were with him, but that he needed help fast. He knew my name, said he worked here." Claire's stomach turned, not from the words themselves, but from the way Carter's face folded inward when he said them, as if ashamed he had believed it. "I followed him," the boy continued. "He led me past the dock, near the big pine. I thought we were going to the vet shed or something, but then he pulled out a cloth, put it over my face." Carter touched the bandage on his elbow. "When I woke up, I was in the cage." Claire swallowed hard, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Carter, you didn't do anything wrong. You're not the one who should feel guilty." Carter blinked fast. I thought I could help. I didn't want Duke to be alone." That broke something in Claire. She turned away for a moment, breath catching in her throat. The idea that a child who had been called too quiet and too strange had followed danger not out of foolishness, but because he trusted. Because he believed in someone, hurt more than she could say. "Thank you for trusting him," she whispered. "You were brave." Outside, officers had finished running prints through the federal system. Sergeant Kim returned with a folder in her hand, her expression grim. "Nolan Rask," she said. 46, former roadshow entertainer. He's been using variations of his clown persona to gain access to events, state fairs, school festivals, summer camps. Disappeared from Louisiana last fall after a near arrest. Been bouncing across state lines since then. Claire frowned. Why camps? Kim flipped open the folder. Least security, lots of transient staff. Easier to pose as entertainment and harder to verify when people are underfunded and overwhelmed. He wasn't just acting alone, though. We found burner phones, coded notes, and cash rolls in his pack. Someone's funding this. Jake, who had entered quietly, arms crossed and jaw tight, spoke for the first time. So what now? We tracked the network, Kim replied. He's just a piece, but he's our first solid lead in a while. That night, the camp held a meeting around the fire pit, not as a celebration, but as a vigil. Lena had been flown home earlier in the day, her parents arriving in a rush of tears and disbelief. Carter's aunt would arrive tomorrow. For now, he sat beside Claire and Duke, who lay curled in the grass, eyes half-lidded, tail thumping faintly when kids passed by and whispered thanks. Marjorie Tate, the camp director, stood near the center, pale-faced and solemn. For once, the woman who usually ran on caffeine and cheer wore no smile. She cleared her throat, then spoke into the low crackle of the fire. Tonight, she said, we acknowledge something dark found its way into our space. But we also acknowledge something light fought back. She turned toward Duke. This dog, she said, voice softening, protected our children, found what we could not, gave us time we didn't realize we were losing. The campers, some still shaken, nodded slowly. One little boy raised his hand and said, "Can we give him a medal?" Marjorie smiled weakly. "We don't have a medal, but we do have this." She knelt beside Duke and placed around his neck a makeshift collar woven from blue and green friendship bracelets, each one tied by a camper who had been told, in simple words, "Duke kept us safe." Carter leaned over and whispered something into Duke's ear. The dog's tail wagged once. Claire watched it all unfold with a swelling heart. She hadn't come to this camp to be a hero. She had come to escape, to breathe, to heal. But somehow, fate, or perhaps something deeper, had put her in the exact place she was needed, and Duke, old and graying, had once again proved what he always had, that loyalty was not a word, it was a life lived. The final day of camp arrived like the last breath of a long-held note tender, slow and full of things left unsaid. The sky was impossibly blue, the kind that held no memory of the chaos that had unfolded just days before. Birds sang in the branches again, counselors packed up cabins. Kids ran, laughed, hugged, cried, posed for goodbye photos with arms slung across shoulders in the way children do when they don't realize yet what it means to miss someone. Claire Morgan stood near the gate beneath the wooden arch that read Cedar Ridge Summer Camp, a clipboard under her arm, watching the line of cars arrive one by one. Parents stepped out in sun hats and polos, half distracted, half relieved. Luggage was tossed into trunks. Water bottles were forgotten in the grass. Carter sat on the wooden bench beside the main path, his sketchbook open on his lap, pencil moving in small, precise strokes. His glasses had a crack on one lens from the time in the cage, but he still wore them, head slightly tilted in that familiar angle of concentration. He didn't say much, as usual, but Claire didn't need him to. In the last 48 hours, the boy who once barely looked up from his drawings had begun meeting people's eyes. Not everyone's just hers, and Duke's. His aunt hadn't come. Sergeant Joanna Kim had called the number 3 times. The woman had picked up once, mumbled something about not knowing anything about a missing kid, and hung up. The social worker in Asheville confirmed that Carter had been in and out of temporary housing for the past 2 years. Nobody had been looking for him. Nobody had noticed he was gone. That night, Claire made her decision. She filled out the paperwork the next morning with the help of Kim and a county liaison. It would take time, of course, home studies, interviews, background checks, but the first step was the easiest. She asked Carter if he wanted to stay. He didn't answer right away. He just flipped to a new page in his sketchbook and drew a house. It had a porch. A woman with glasses stood on the steps, and beside her, lying in the sun, was Duke. Claire smiled. "I'll take that as a yes." They left camp that evening, not with fanfare, but with quiet purpose. Jake helped load the car, giving Claire a nod and Carter a rough but sincere fist bump. The boy didn't say goodbye, but he handed Jake a sketch, a simple pencil drawing of a cabin, untouched, peaceful, with the words, "Thanks for not being afraid." Jake folded it carefully and placed it in his back pocket. Claire's house stood just outside of town, tucked between maple trees and wild grass that brushed against the porch rails. It was a craftsman-style home, with creaky floorboards and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of cinnamon. The porch was Duke's favorite place. He took his spot there the moment they arrived, lying down with a soft grunt, tail wagging once as if to say, "This will do." That night, Claire made spaghetti Carter's choice. He helped set the table, quietly pulling out the good plates and mismatched silverware. Duke stayed nearby, his eyes on the boy, ears twitching with every sound, but his body finally, blessedly, at ease. After dinner, they sat on the back steps and watched the fireflies blink into being. Claire sipped tea. Carter sketched. Duke rested his head on Claire's foot, his eyes half closed. The stars came out one by one, and for the first time in a long while, Claire didn't feel the ache of silence. She felt a kind of fullness, quiet, but real. Later that week, Carter handed her a drawing. It was done in colored pencil, carefully shaded, every line deliberate. It showed a forest clearing, tall pines rising around a shaft of golden light. In the center stood Duke, regal and calm, his ears up, his gaze sharp, as if hearing something far away. At the bottom, Carter had written, in bold block letters, "The dog who heard the truth." Claire held the paper for a long time before she spoke. "You got his eyes just right," she said softly. Carter didn't say anything. He just smiled, and Duke, lying nearby in the sun with a breeze in his fur and a boy sketching under his watchful eye, gave a slow blink. He didn't need to find anyone else. He didn't need to search or sniff or bark or chase shadows through dark woods. He had found what he was meant to protect, not a place, but a person. And it was enough. Sometimes, the ones who save us don't speak our language. They just stay, watch, and protect when no one else sees the danger. Duke reminded us that loyalty doesn't need words, and trust often comes from the quietest corners. In everyday life, maybe we all need to pause and notice who's standing by us when the world turns dark. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in second chances. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this one. And tell us in the comments, who is the Duke in your life, the one who saw the truth before anyone else?